So what we have is just a JPEG, and I'm going to just use this JPEG to demonstrate how you would add and change aspects of lights. Now, before you can use lights on any layer, it has to be set to a 3D layer. So 2D layers can't receive light, they can't cast shadows, they can't do anything light related. So I'm going to change this into a 3D layer, and then I'm going to control click, and as you would expect, new light is in the same place as all of the other objects that we've been creating, like null objects and cameras and things like that. Now, the light settings pop up when you create a new light, and you can name it. First of all, I'm going to call this point. I'll call it yellow point light. So you name it first, then in the settings you can choose what kind of a light you want to choose. Now you have 4 to choose from there. You've got parallel, spot, point and ambient. Now parallel creates light coming from a particular direction but not from a single point. So a parallel light source is much like the sun in the sky, in that it's going to cast shadows. It's coming from a direction, but it's not like holding up a light bulb on front of something. That's parallel. Spotlights are, as you would expect, it's like shining a torch. Now, spotlights can be pointed in a particular direction, and as you would expect, behind the spotlight there is no light, so it's only pointing in one direction. Now, a point light is much like a light bulb. So a point light is like holding up a light bulb in a room. So if you think about in a room like this with no other light going on, if you were to hold up a 40-watt light bulb and move it around the room, it would give out an omnidirectional light in all directions, but it would fall off gradually as the objects are further away from it. Now, an ambient light is a light that has no source really. It's like going into a room and switching on a load of not neon lights, but fluorescent lights all around the room. It just gives an overall illumination to the scene. Okay, so it doesn't come from a particular direction, it doesn't fall off or get darker as it moves away, and it doesn't cast shadows or anything like that. It's just another way of adding overall light to a scene. Now, I have this set to spot at the moment, which will give me a certain amount of these that I can change. So the intensity is the brightness. Now, intensity can be set to positive or negative values. If you have it in negative values and you shine it on something, then it's going to actually remove light from the object that you're pointing it at. Now, the cone angle is the angle or the width of that torch, essentially. So the cone angle, we'll see in a moment, gives you a wider spread of light across an object, or a narrower, more spotlight. Well, it is a spotlight, but more of a spotlight in a narrow beam with a narrower cone angle. And cone feather then is how soft that spotlight is when it's shining on something. Now, fall off. If you think about fall off as how light diminishes as it moves away from the light source, imagine shining a torch down along the floor. The area of the floor directly beneath the torch is going to be quite bright, but the light is literally going to fall off as it gets further from that torch. It's going to be less and less and less light the further that you get, the further away you are from that torch. So you can set a light to have no fall off, you can set it to have a smooth fall off, or an inverse square clamped fall off. Now, fall off is only relevant for spotlights and point lights. Okay, so if I have a spot or a point light selected, I can go down to fall off, and if I wanted to, I could just leave it with no fall off, or I could set that to smooth. Now, what smooth does is it sets a radius around my light source, and the radius is going to be completely filled with that light at full intensity. Now, at the edge of that radius, the fall off is going to begin, and the fall off distance is then shown here in pixels. So this will fall off from full intensity to no intensity over 500 pixels. Now, inverse square clamped relates to the more realistic way that light behaves in the real world. Now, the inverse square law in terms of lighting and photography relates to the distance that light travels. If you imagine light traveling 1 meter, the object at 1 meter is going to be at a particular brightness. Okay, now if you move that object twice as far, in other words 2 meters, it's going to be the inverse square of that distance in terms of the brightness. Now what that means is that when you go twice as far, it's going to get 4 times as dark. If you go 3 times as far, it's going to be 9 times as dark, and so on and so forth. You square the amount of distance, or in terms of, like, if you're going from 1 meter to 2 meters, you're doubling it. It's going to get minus 4 times as bright, and so on and so forth. Now what this will do is it will give you a different visual result in terms of the light transition from full intensity to darkness. And it, as I say, it more replicates light in the real world. Cast shadows means that if this light is shining on something that is sitting on front of something else, it's going to cast a shadow on the background object. And when you have that set, you can change the darkness from fully black to a lighter shade, or more of a mix with the background, and then the shadow diffusion will give you a softer shadow. So those are the overall controls, and you can get back into these at any time once you've created the light just by double clicking on the lights layer. So I'll click OK. Actually, I was calling this yellow point light for a reason. I'll just make that yellow just to give it a bit of color. Click OK. Now the yellow point light has popped in there and can't see anything. Okay, so there could be a few different reasons for this. I'll change this to 2 views, and I'll see what's going on with this. There we go. Okay, so it's to do with the fall off. So if, for example, I wanted to make that picture visible here, I'll double click on that, set the fall off to smooth, give it a bigger radius and fall off distance, and I'll up the intensity. Now I may just need to actually bring this closer to the object. So what I'll do, just like I would with a camera, I'll catch it by not the X, Y or Z axes, but the actual body of the light, and push that in, and you'll see that it starts to illuminate. So this is the spotlight. Now you'll see that fall off in action there. So I'll bring that back up. Bring the intensity down, open up the cone angle to make it wider, soften it a little bit. Now I can change that to inverse square clamped, see what the difference is. You'll see now that it gives a different kind of result. Now, and up the radius to give it more illumination on the object. Okay, so this, you can start to see now the spotlight is working. It's shining from a particular direction, or from a particular place in a direction. So if I bring the cone angle down now, you'll see a more focused spotlight. So that's a really narrow angle there, and that's giving me a very narrow beam of light being cast onto that. Now if I change this from spotlight to point light, you'll see a different result. So now I have a different looking light object here with little lines coming out in all directions telling me it's going in all directions, and I can pick this up now and move it around. Now this differs from a spotlight in that it's not pointing in a particular direction, it's shining in all directions from that point. So I can use this to create some sort of an effect like that. Okay, so there's lots of ways that you can use lights on video to colorize, to add kind of atmosphere and effect. The point light would be a good example of that. So I'll just change this from yellow to white now. Change that back to smooth. Okay. Now the parallel light is going to shine from that direction, and it's going to cast a much wider shaft of light on that. Okay, now it's because it's very close to it, it is taking on kind of the appearance of a spotlight. And the ambient light, finally, if I change that to ambient, you'll see that the entire scene becomes illuminated. Okay, so this would be another way of lightening or darkening the overall scene using an ambient light. Now, the light is one part of what you're dealing with. The light itself is only one part of what you're dealing with when you're working with lights in After Effects. So if I click OK, and actually I'm going to change this back to a point light for the moment. Click OK, and I'll move this out a little bit, out here. Now, when you're working with lights, you're also going to be working with shadows, and you're going to be using what are called the material options of the objects that you're shining the light on to get different results. Now, this, for example, once there's a light and you have it set to 3D here, you have material options. Now, the material options will allow you to specify whether this object itself will cast shadows, whether it will accept shadows, whether it will accept lights. And then down at the bottom, you have the actual material qualities of the object itself. Now, I've got a link on my site to this page here, which gives you a good detailed account of what each one of these mean. Now, they all kind of work in conjunction with each other. They're kind of a little bit complex, so I'll let you have a look at those afterwards in your own time. Just to give you a quick idea, specular, for example, will turn it from a kind of a matte to a very shiny, as if surface, as if you were shining the light on something that was behind glass, or something that was printed on aluminium or something like that. It's best just to have a look at those descriptions on the help file and play around with them yourself, just to see exactly what each one of those does. Now, this one here, cast shadows, accept shadows, that's on, that's fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a piece of text in between the light and the layer. I'm going to switch off my light for the moment, because delete that, go again. Now, I think I've just realized why this is taking so long to render. I think I've dropped a massive resolution, or an image with a very high resolution, down onto the composition window, which is actually it's a very large composition window I'm working with at the moment. So I'll just carry on with it for the moment. Now I'm going to turn this into white text and leave it there. Now I'll switch back on my light. Now bring my text, I'll turn my text into a 3D layer first and pull that forward. So I've got my light, my text, and then my background object. Now we've looked at the material options of the background object, now the material options of the text. So first one here, casts shadows. I need to switch that on. Now straight away you'll see that a shadow is being cast. So now I can go back into the light, toggle open its light options, shadow diffusion and change that from a hard shadow into a softer shadow, and I can bring down the darkness as well so it mixes more with the background. Now this will give you more of a softer kind of a shadow. So you can see now that's quite a realistic looking shadow that I have there. Now I'm going to just give my text a stroke so that you can see the text a little bit better. Okay, so if I was to get this light now, I can pull open its own transform properties, such as the position property, and I'll move along on front of the text just so that you can see the shadow also moving. Now the shadow will disappear for a while, probably because it needs to render. So I'm just going to leave that there for the moment. I'm going to keyframe the position. And then move it further down. Just render that out. So you can see the shadow moving across the screen as it renders through those frames. Again, it's taken a while because it's a high-res image, but I'm sure you get the idea. Okay. Just the first few frames there rendered out. So you can get some very realistic effects using lights and objects in After Effects. Now I'm going to create a new composition here, just something that will actually render for me, and look at it slightly differently. Now let's say that you want to use lights as a kind of an animating element. I'm just going to put in some text here. Bring that down. Let's see if we can get something a little bit. Okay, that'll do. Now, what I can do here is I can play around with the animation of the lights and try and get them to kind of reveal that text. Now, what I'm going to go for here is that kind of colored text where the spotlights are kind of shining all over the text to give it a kind of a theatrical look. Now, the way that I'm going to do that is to create one light. Oops. I'm going to make it a point light. This one I'm going to start with red, give it a nice bright intensity, fall off smooth, that's all fine. Cast shadows doesn't really matter, I'll switch that off for the moment, and click OK. Now, here's the warning. Camera and lights do not affect 2D layers. That's fine. I forgot to turn my text into a 3D layer before I started. Now, so the first thing I do is position the light so that it is just revealing part of that text. Someone wouldn't mind getting the lights there, actually, it might be easier to see. It's the other one, yeah. You can turn on the, yeah. Okay, so this light now can be basically moved across to reveal the text. So if I wanted to now, I could do a very kind of straightforward position animation. I can start there and pull it across. Now all I'm doing here is I'm just narrowing the beam of light. Now if I wanted to leave it at this, I could just have that simple kind of an animation going across there, shorten it slightly. Now what I want to do is I want to create a little bit more kind of action in this. Now what I'm going to show you is a way of getting this to kind of loop around in a figure of 8, and I'm going to use a mask as the motion path. So I'm kind of jumping into a different topic slightly here, but it's still a handy thing to know. So if you bear with me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the text, get my pen tool, and start creating a mask in a figure of 8. And it's just pretty much covering the text like that. Now when you create a mask, you can toggle open, you can go down to your masks, open up the mask itself, and get the mask path parameter. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this mask path from being a mask into being a motion path. Okay, so that's a handy little trick. If you have a complex shape, you can draw it up as a mask and literally copy the mask path data out of the mask itself and paste it as a motion path. Now what After Effects does is it takes that motion path and moves the object that you've just pasted it onto and allows the object to move freely along that. So what you have is 3 keyframes that are created that allow it to move in a kind of a figure of 8 motion here. So I can delete that mask now, and now I'm just going to change this view to top. Now what's happened here is that my light is now perfectly in line with my text, so all I'm going to do is push that text back a bit and change that back to active camera. There we go. So that's kind of where I want it to be in terms of the light shining on it. Now I know you can't really see this terribly well, so I'll go through it quickly. Now deselect the text. So now you can see that text being illuminated as the light moves around it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take these keyframes, copy that one, paste it back out here, copy this one and paste it there, and so on and so forth. So what I can do now is I can get that to loop twice just by copying and pasting those keyframes. So you can kind of see where this is going now. You have a light that's doing a nice job there, just illuminating the text. I might actually make it a bit brighter or up the radius maybe. Okay, that's a little bit better. Now I can go back and change these at any time. Now I'll call this one red, copy and paste it, call this one green. Whoops. Now all I need to do is open up the parameters, change this from a red light to a green light, and toggle open that position parameter and pull all those keyframes up slightly to knock the 2 lights out of sync with each other. Okay, so now I've got red, I've got green. I didn't want to do that. Okay, so you're starting to see kind of where this is going. All I need now is a third one, and make this one blue. Change that to a blue. Now as you can see, it's obeying as you would expect it to the color mixing, RGB color mixing theory here, in that I've created a blue, put it straight down over a green, and ended up with a cyan color. So what I need to do to get that blue to just be blue is to push it out of sync with that light again. Now I'm starting to get a range of colors. All kind of doing their own thing there. Now you would have to spend a little bit more time obviously playing around with the keyframes in terms of staggering them to get that effect without them all being on top of each other, such as that point here. So that's where the red, green and the blue are all in one place, and then they become separated. So that's creating lights animating lights and dealing with shadows and the material options of the objects themselves. Now actually what I could do here is go down to the material options of the text itself and play with that to get a different result. And just see what kind of effects you get. So now it's a little bit kind of shinier looking as the text goes across it.